This is the story of Blackjack and the adventure for the white unicorn. I am sure many of you have heard of the story and adventure of old about the famous pirate captain by the name of Captain Jack. And no, I don't mean Captain Hook or Captain Jack Sparrow or the infamous Captain Blackbeard himself. Captain Jack was a pirate before there were pirates. Instead of being famous for his looting or pillaging, Captain Blackjack was known for his wonderful adventures all around the world. Just sit back, grab some popcorn, and I'll tell you a story full of mysteries and adventure. The story tonight is called The Greensleeves. One day a letter arrived to Captain Jack's boat that contained a small distinguished wax seal, words that looked like it may be somewhat important. Captain Black had just awakened from a long nap and was extremely tired from the long adventure to India in the previous months before. As he looked at the letter, he started to make out the words. It said detergent, detergent. What does that mean? As his eyes were finally open enough to see, he tried to read the words again. Oh, that word is not detergent. That word's urgent. Urgent, he said. But what is so urgent? I guess I must read the letter to see. Captain Blackjack broke open the small, round, golden seal, folded it back the one sheet of paper, and began to read.
Dear Captain Black, your services are greatly needed for Spain. You are greatly admired and are known in all of the kingdoms for your bravery and courage. Your adventures have become stories of legend, as well as your pillar of strength.
That means he's really strong.
Come to the castle at once, and I will tell you what is so imperative.
That means it's really important.
From the King of Spain.
Captain Black took a second to gather his thoughts as he laid down the letter from the king. He wondered why the king needed detergent.
No, Ryan, the word was urgent, not detergent.
Oh, that's right. What was so urgent? The next day, Captain Jack Black rode his horse up to the castle to visit the king. The king humbly walked down from the throne. The captain spoke and said, Captain Jack, my little girl is not doing very well. She is sick, and I am worried that if I don't do something, that something bad may happen to her. Maybe she will be sick forever. I need your help. There's a story of a white unicorn that heals any sickness. With one touch of the horn, the sickness just dies away. The special animal is called the white unicorn. The legend says it is only found on Galapagos Island. It has large, powerful legs, and it sits 20 hands tall.
That means it's taller than most horses.
It is beautiful but more powerful than any other horse in the world. I will give you 400 pieces of gold, but you must take along with you 4 other knights from 4 different kingdoms. You must leave Spain and go to the kingdoms on the list, a sheet of paper. The first name was Kendall from England, who was the famous knight who was the best swordsman in England. Dan from Denmark, who was the best axeman of the north. Sven from Switzerland, who was the best boatsman of all Atlanta. Ike from Iceland, who was known all around the world for being able to shoot a wart off a witch's nose from 100 meters away.
For 40 days and 40 nights the wind blew. It was some of the worst wind and water that Captain Jack had ever seen. He was glad that Sven, the boatsman from Sweden, had joined the journey. Sven could tell by just smell what direction they needed to go. And, by the way, he used the compass. He said that he could smell and know any direction to go as long as he held out that compass of his. He said his nose made the compass move in the right direction. After 41 days at sea, Sven called out on the starboard side of the boat, "Land! Land! I see land over yonder." Captain Jack looked over his shoulder and saw in the distant fog a small green and brown speck that did look like land. All the men were overjoyed that land was close. You could even hear the seagulls in the background. They were getting closer every second. The men took down anchor in a small cove on the left side of the island. The water was deep enough that the boat wouldn't get damaged by the big rocks that were above and below the water. As the men walked on the land, the men thought, "This island is so beautiful." They had never seen sand as white as snow, or strange and large exotic trees. The trees had fruit on it the size of a large man's head. The men walked for many hours on the island, investigating the new exotic things they had never seen before. They took all the tools they could carry just in case they needed them. Dan from Denmark, who was the best axeman of the north, helped cut down small trees to make the path. As the sun went down over the mountains, the brave men decided to make camp next to a small stream. As darkness broke, one could hear the crackling of a fire and the chirping of nearby crickets. The men sat around the small fire, talking about all the wonderful things they had seen that day. At one instant, Captain Jack stood up and addressed these men. He wanted to remind them of something very important. He said, "As beautiful as this island is, we must remember why we are here. It is to save the life of the king's little girl. That is the most important thing. We must find the unicorn and take off its horn. Ives from Iceland, who is known around the world for being able to shoot off a wart off a witch's nose from 100 meters away, spoke up and said, 'How do we find and capture that unicorn?' Ives was a small, round man that kind of looked like an elf at times. He had a small red hat on his head that some say would never come off. If you look in Iceland, you may find the book about Ives' father and the story of the king who tried to take off his 500 hats. Every time the king would make him take off a hat, another would grow in its place. Anyway, his hat was green and his shoes were pointy and his sleeves were green. He wore the green sleeves because that was the color of his family crest." Captain Black spoke up after Ives had finished and began to tell the others a strategy for capturing the large unicorn the next day. After the men had finished, they put out the fire and went to sleep. Late in the night, long after the flames from the campfire had died down, Captain Jack started to toss and turn in his sleep. He couldn't help but be restless, for in his sleep he began to have the most disturbing dream. In this dream, he saw the 5 men on their journey walking on the east side of the island. He could still see his boat far, far away, close to a large rock cliff on the east side. As the men continued to walk, they came to a large, strange-shaped rock city. It was covered with large brown vines that looked like long, meandering snakes waiting at any minute to bite its passing victim. The men continued to get closer, and at the center of the rock city they saw what they thought was a door. Captain Jack took his torch and shined it on the door. There on that door was a picture of a large horse. The horse was jumping in the air as if it could fly. Kendall from England, who was the famous knight who was the best swordsman in England, said this must be the place of the great white unicorn. Although Captain Black was thankful that they had found the home of the white unicorn, there was still something uneasy about being there. As he opened the door, there in the middle was a large area as big as a football field of the greatest, greenest grass he had ever seen. And in the middle he saw something he had never seen with his eyes before. Something wonderful. But just as his eyes tried to focus on the object, Captain Jack and his men felt large hands from out of nowhere, pushing them one at a time down into a crevice located next to the door on the ground. They must have fallen for 15 seconds before they hit the hard, cold, watery ground. As the men tried to get up and dust off the dirt from each other's backs, Captain Jack noticed one thing that was very strange indeed. He thought he traveled to the island with 4 other men. Kendall from England, who was a famous knight that was the best swordsman in England, Dan from Denmark, who was the best axeman of the north, Sven from Sweden, who was the best boatsman of all the Atlantic, and Ives from Iceland, who was known around the world for being able to shoot a wart off a witch's nose from 100 meters away. That made 5 if he included himself. As he felt around the dark crevice, he could only feel 3 other people. As he began to ponder the reasons, he heard a voice from above that said, "The unicorn is all mine, all mine, all mine." As the voice faded away in front of him, next to his right foot was a small wooden box. He took his candle right out and put his hands on the box and opened it. Suddenly, he heard music playing. Right then, Captain Jack woke up from his dream, sweating and full of fear. What was this terrible dream trying to tell me? He asked himself. He thought and thought to himself, if this dream is trying to tell me something, then it could only be one thing. That someone in this crew is a traitor and had every intention on killing in order to keep the unicorn horn for themselves. And what about that strange music box? What was that music from the box trying to tell him? The next morning, the men woke up from camp. Captain Jack didn't discuss his dream to anyone. He was fearful that the men would think him crazy if he brought it up. As the men hiked higher up the mountain, Captain Jack couldn't get that sound he heard in his dream out of his head. He had heard it before. Was it a sign? If he knew what song it was, would it give him a clue? As the men walked for hours, they finally came to the large-shaped city that was made out of rocks. It was covered with large brown vines that looked like long, meandering snakes waiting at any minute to bite its passing victim. Captain Jack Black looked back and could see his boat far, far away, close to a large rock cliff to the east side of the island. Captain Jack had seen this place before. It was exactly like his dream. As he continued to walk, he still couldn't get that song from the music box out of his head. What is that song? What is the name of that song? I've heard it before. It's driving me crazy. The men walked another 200 yards to the center of the rock city and saw the door. Captain Jack knew what picture was on the door and cautioned the men to move slowly, knowing that one of them was a killer. Captain Jack had to think fast. He said to himself, I need a plan. What does that sound mean? And what is it trying to tell me? As the door opened, all of a sudden Captain Jack wasn't scared of the strange place. He was far more scared of what and who had traveled with him to this place. Captain Jack instinctively kept a close watch on the other men, especially Ives from Iceland. Captain Jack and his men opened the door. There in the middle was a large football field of the greenest grass he had ever seen. And in the middle, he saw something he had never seen with his eyes before. Something wonderful. He saw the white unicorn. Between the men and the unicorn lay a large, deep crevice. Captain Jack turned around and saw that Ives was preparing to push Finn into the crevice. Captain Jack suddenly cried out, "Watch out!" Sven moved out of the way, and with Ives' momentum, he fell into the crevice. The men all looked towards the captain and said, "How did you know to look for Ives?" The captain told the crew about his dreams, and finally remembering the name of the song and also the color of Ives' family crest, Greensleeves. His dream was trying to tell him something. After realizing what had happened, the men gathered their thoughts and planned to carefully approach the unicorn. They slowly snuck up on the animal, and it turned to look at them. The men held out their hands to show that they meant no harm. What the unicorn did greatly surprised the crew. The animal leaned its head over as if to offer its horn. The men pulled at the horn as gently as possible and realized what they had to do. Captain Jack reached forward and simply unscrewed the horn. The crew said afterwards that they thought they saw the unicorn smile as it turned and played with the other horses.
The men set sail for Spain, traveling northeast. The travel was much easier than the early passage due to a strong headwind that helped pick up wind for the sail. It only took them 20 days to get back to Spain. As Captain Jack and his brave crew finally arrived in Spain, all the townspeople cheered as they rode their horses up to the castle. The men knew that their story would be told not only in Spain, but in all the world. As they entered the castle, the king came out to greet them. He asked, "Did you find the white unicorn and bring it back its horn?" Captain Jack boldly spoke up and said, "Yes, sire, we did." Captain Jack handed over the horn to the king, and we said to the king, "I had never taken on an adventure that I didn't plan to complete. When you, my king, told me how detergent it was to complete the journey."
No, Ryan, the word was urgent, not detergent.
Oh, yeah. Well, anyway, the princess was saved. They danced and played music and lived happily ever after. And as every narrator has to say, the end.
Away in the manger, no it was a bed. The little Lord Jesus lay down his sweet head. The stars in the sky looked down where he lay. The little Lord Jesus asleep on the hay.
I hope you enjoy this Christmas season gift we've given you, Captain Blackjack. During this story, you've heard the voices of Caleb, Ryan, Timothy, and with the special feature of Jacob singing Away in the Manger at the end. Hope you have a great Christmas from the Anderson family.